All right. Welcome everybody to the Sherwood City Council meeting. We've got a wet work session here. It's 5:45 on February 6, 2024. For our work session, we've got 4 items tonight. The first one is annexation and policy agreements, and we're going to talk about our annual housing report, our donation leave policy, and our work bank program. I should say proposed programs, policies. Anyway, so very first one is annexation policies and agreement. Eric, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Rosner. So this is council fiscal year 23-24 under economic development. Deliverable 1.2 is to create annexation policies and processes to manage our growth goals as it relates to infrastructure, school capacity, and long-term community needs. So council goal driving this, if you recall, we're doing the Sherwood West work sessions and talked a little bit about annexation policy. I don't think Councilor Scott is here, but he was the main one, I think, that requested it to come back as soon as possible. Basically, why are we not applying this right away? Basically, not citywide, but urban growth boundary wide within our jurisdiction. So we have drafted annexation policy. I'll go over what that looks like. But first, starting at a little bit bigger level, where is this actually going to apply? It would apply to any areas that are within our urban growth boundary, but not currently within the city. So the main area being the Brookman addition in the south, any land there that has not been annexed into the city, this policy would apply to. Tonkin employment area, just the little smaller infill areas here, this policy would apply to. And then if we get a yes from Metro on Sherwood West, it would automatically apply to Sherwood West as well. There are a few really small infill areas as well, and this annexation policy would also apply to these areas. But in terms of infrastructure and the sort of purpose of the policy, less bang for the buck there on those smaller lots, if you will. So what's actually in the policy? So the approval body, as with all annexations right now, city council is the approval body right now. And as in this policy, annexations do not go to planning commission first. They come straight to you. They go from the staff level straight to city council. So that's not proposed to change as part of this policy. Any appeals, it's a type 5 decision. If there is an appeal, it will be heard by the Land Use Board of Appeals, similar to any final decision that city council makes. The main new element or main teeth, if you will, in the policy, which we don't use right now, is an annexation agreement. Fairly common with jurisdictions as a tool to guide the annexation process and also ensure really that public facilities are met, but also things, if we're talking about master plans, we can require compliance with the master plan through the annexation agreement. So just to get into details, basically the code will say a property owner or an applicant has to develop an annexation agreement and include that annexation agreement with the annexation application. So it would be negotiated mainly between staff and the applicant prior to coming to city council. You guys as city council, of course, can modify the agreement. So if there's certain elements that you don't like, want to add, remove, modify, the end authorities with city council. So you guys could modify the agreement prior to approving it. I haven't given a lot of thought about whether work sessions would be appropriate for an annexation agreement, but certainly if it's a really large property, we might bring it to you as a heads up through a work session. Hey, we're starting to develop this annexation agreement, and talk about it through a work session with the applicant. The main elements of the annexation agreement around transportation requires the applicant to identify transportation facilities that are required to serve the development at full build out of the site. And this is really important. And we all know transportation infrastructure, really difficult to get funded, really difficult to get right. From the planning and land use side, once they annex the property, let's say without this agreement, and we get into a land use application, our hands are tied for the most part by state law, constitutional law for proportionality, land use approval clocks, the 120-day clock. There's just a lot of constraints that come in at the land use process that we can address early on through the annexation agreement when our hands are not tied by really anything, and it's really just wide open. So again, we have the applicant identify transportation facilities that are required to serve the site at full burden. It would also require the applicant to certify through the engineering department, water, sanitary sewer, storm sewer capacity is available or is available within 18 months to serve the site. And then also requires the applicant to guarantee any needed public improvements to serve the site or limit the development until that capacity actually comes. So it's basically front loading the public facility conversation and not back ending it through a land use or through an engineering review. So just, you know, in my opinion, a lot of benefits to that. And I'll just say the policy also allows the city to not require this. If it's a small site, if infrastructure is already adequately addressed, it's going to take more time. For example, cost, whatever, unnecessary. The annexation agreement is not actually required, but it's a tool that we can use if we want to use it.
So to ask one question on that is, it's not going to be, there's not a case where a piece of property would be grandfathered in or anything where they would say, well, at the time we applied for this annexation agreement, you weren't requiring a build out of X, Y, and Z. And we can come at that time and say, well, we require it now.
Right. So once we, you know, if you guys want to move forward with this policy, we'll bring it back for an ordinance in the spring. Once we,
I mean, yeah, assuming that it was passed, right? But I'm saying that.
pass it, sure. No, so we pass it in the spring, and then
Right.
So once we pass it, any property that's not currently in the city is subject to the ordinance.
Regardless of whether they've tried to be annexed before or any, I mean, like edge cases.
If they're not currently in the city.
Perfect.
And so the only exception would be if they apply between now
And when we adopt it,
the
okay,
ordinance, yeah.
that's what I was hoping, okay, thanks.
But as soon as we adopt it and it becomes effective, it applies, yeah, there'd be no grandfathering within the current urban growth boundary, for example.
Okay, great.
In terms of the approval criteria, it's a little bit of a duplicate of the annexation agreement. But it's the criteria that you'd be weighing the annexation against. And we have some right now in the comprehensive plan, but this is actually going to put it into the development code and make it a little bit more clear, and add more detail to it. The annexation must be determined to be in the best interest of the city. That's pretty open, actually, and that kind of gets to another issue, is that once we get into the land use for housing, for example, it has to be clear and objective standards. So this is another example of how we can have more flexibility early on with development.
Can I point out something, please? One of the reasons we're doing this is because what was it, Senate Bill 1573, yeah.
HB
Or HB 1573
Right.
took away voter annexations. And as part of that, so today if someone made a request, we don't have a lot of ability to stop it.
Correct.
Right.
Well, yeah, and so I can just get to that, it's actually here. So 1573 would still apply. But I think to your point, what we're doing here is enhancing our own policy. We can't send it to the voters if they follow our policy, but we still determine our own policy outside of requiring it to go to the voters. And so
this gives us more control over what's coming in, so we can make sure that we're
yes,
doing things in the best interest of the city.
correct, but we still can't send it to the voters. But we can beef up our own policy to make sure that if it's not going to the voters, that it's in the best interest of the city.
Yeah, and I just want to point that out because this is not an effort to make it easier to annex. This is an effort to make sure that under the new state rules that we have a say in how it's done.
Correct.
Basically.
So I actually went and reread HB 1573 with my few years since we've addressed it. Cause I'm like, okay, how is this different from what we went through with Brookman?
Mhm.
And the part that says the proposal conforms to all other requirements of the city's ordinances. So at the time we did Brookman, we didn't have anything in place that could have stopped the annexation.
We did, basically it was governed by the comprehensive plan policies. And so we have comprehensive plan policies that say, in order to annex, here's the criteria. So we did, but it was in the comp plan. This is gonna be in the development code, so, you know, it's a little bit more of a standard document that an applicant's gonna look at to say, what are the requirements? You know, it's actually adopted into our municipal code instead of the comp plan being sort of referenced in the municipal code, so it gets it more squarely, I guess, present within our policy and regulations. And also just adds a lot more detail, but technically we had policy, it was just kind of in an obscure place in the.
But everything that we have, they were able
It
to
was,
comply with.
yeah, they complied with it,
Yeah.
and it was very general standards and criteria like, there's not gonna be leapfrog, it has to be adjacent to the
Yeah.
current city boundary. There's no leapfrogging. And, you know, if we were being really picky as a jurisdiction, sure, we could have drilled down into that and said, okay, this actually isn't right because this and that. But it would have been much more difficult. This is very clear. You have to give us a report. So you have to give us a TIA, basically, transportation impact analysis upfront. And we can start to identify, if we bring this in and it gets developed early on, we can identify the issues. Where before we say, yeah, it mostly looks good, you're adjacent to the city, go ahead and through your land use application, submit a TIA. And then by the time we get to that point, oftentimes it's really difficult to do anything. Or we have to deny the application, and that just gets into a whole nother mess, if you will. So,
One more question on this. So assuming inside the master plan, sure it was. If that's in process and someone applies to be annexed and we haven't finalized it, can we maybe as part of the annexation agreement that you have to comply with that master plan?
I mean, I would say we wouldn't even be entertaining annexation applications until we finish the master plan.
And we could do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Other criteria, kind of a duplicate of that public facility. This is much broader than just your base utilities. So we talk about fiber, parks, trails, police, waste. And so we can start to look at, to your point, what's in the master plan for parks? And are you agreeing to provide that park, for example? Public facilities and services must be provided in orderly, efficient, and timely manner. Metro and state annexation regulations continue to apply. So there still are other layers, if you will, Metro code, state law. I have forwarded this to Metro for comment. If we actually do this, it'll be an ordinance. So we have to send notice to DLCD as well. So they'll comment on all this, make sure it complies with their laws. And then for housing specifically, clear and objective standards do not apply to annexation. So again, it just gives us more flexibility. I mean, I think we all support more housing. We want more housing in the city. However, as soon as we get a housing application, our hands are tied as it relates to a lot of different things. And so this allows us to negotiate up front, make sure the public services facilities are provided with that housing. In terms of the zoning, right now we're on what's called a one map system. And so go back to this map over here. Let's take the Brookman edition, for example. You can see all these little letters in here, which are the future zoning upon annexation. And so basically this would be the same approach for Sherwood West as well. When we go through the comprehensive plan process, we'll designate zoning. Once they annex, or once they go through this agreement and annex, we just apply that zoning outright. But they can do, if they'd like, a concurrent zone change, and you guys would approve that as well. So if they don't like the zoning, they can do a concurrent zone change, but you guys would approve that through a type 5 process as well. Or not.
Approve or not, yeah.
Approve or not,
Yeah.
correct. And that's really the presentation. We get into the details if you'd like, but the discussion questions are, first, should this apply to all areas in the city? Right now, we have it in our residential areas in the Brookman, we have it in our employment areas in Tonkin, and it would be to Sherwood West as well. So should it apply to all those areas? I can share more about that. And then just any comments, questions. Sorry, folks.
What is your suggestion?
I would recommend it apply to all areas. I think we obviously really want to encourage employment growth. So if there's no concern around infrastructure within the Tonkin employment area, and we want to get that going as fast as possible, we can forego the annexation agreement. A really good example of why I still like it, we went through a really complicated application in the Tonkin employment area recently, all related to one local road. And it delayed the project about a year probably. And, we could have set that expectation up front between the property owners of where the road was going to be, what the expectation was, and potentially head off an issue like that. So,
Do we risk? You said we could not require an annexation agreement in some cases and require it in some. Do we risk being accused of not being fair?
Annexation equity policy. I don't think so.
no.
Unless it's some sort of a protected type of a class that there's no evidence of any discrimination. I mean, I think.
I mean, somebody will probably, there'll be somebody who will call us out, but.
The value, of course, would be there as part of a staff report, encouraging, or advocating that there's no development agreements not necessary. There would be a rationale, an argument.
That's right.
Versus just, oh, I like that guy or gal.
So it sounds like the pro on this is that we are able to get more control to the city representatives, if not the citizens themselves. In playing devil's advocate, what is the downside? Is it that it slows down?
Great question. Yes.
Okay, so potentially could slow down development. But if we see that as a positive to make sure that we're able to take a look at it before it comes in, then that's not necessarily a negative.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. It's going to be additional time and cost upfront. So someone's, an applicant or a developer is going to look at our code, and right now it really doesn't look that hard to annex into the city, right? And so maybe that's a pro, maybe that's a con. When they look at this, they're going to know there's a lot of teeth that we have that we might call on to make sure that infrastructure is there or whatever. And so, it could, a developer could look at it and say, oh man, just not get a great feel right away, right? Oh, this is a lot of hoops to jump through. What I'll say is Bruce is here, I'm here, especially for the employment growth. We're going to be at the table with the developer early on saying, yes, we have this policy. Here's what we would expect, and sort of walk them through the process. And so, yes, it's going to be more time. It's going to be more cost. In the end, though, in my opinion, it's just my opinion. If we address all of those really difficult issues up front, it's just going to be better for the city in the long term. And I think that's why it's a council.
I was just gonna ask about that, because in the past, when we didn't have the state preempting all their control, all these questions were getting dealt with in, from the time it's brought in to the time you're actually building. Right? So really kind of pushing it all to the front of the board.
Right, but the risk is that we drive away some development because of the burden. And I'm actually not saying that's a negative thing, because if that's what it's hinging on, that they don't want to work through what we want in the city, then I don't know that I want the developer here anyway. But we as a council have to know that, we're asking, at least 2 city employees to spend more time up front, and so that's more cost that department has to incur as we're putting this through.
Yeah, and that's another good point. It will be more work, frankly, upfront for staff as well. Engineering department is going to have to be involved. I mean, the planners will probably lead the process. The planning department would, but it's going to require reviews, for example, by the engineering department to make sure that the facilities are adequate. It would be the TIA, et cetera. So there will be time and cost to the city as well.
Right.
Keith, you have a question? No. So I do want to make sure we have time for 3 other agenda items. Any other questions? Everyone okay with this?
Good job.
Great job.
All right.
So our next item is our annual housing report, and Eric, so you would lead this one too.
I will. Oh, it's on the desktop. Thank you.
Housing report presentation, bottom PowerPoint.
Bottom.
Up,
This one?
up, up,
Ah,
up.
thank
Oh,
you. Oh, thank you.
Zoom. Right, are we still screen sharing?
I'll screen share it right now.
Okay.
All right. Agenda item number 2, annual housing reports. I think we brought this to you last month, actually. So if you recall, we brought forward the 2022 housing report. Again, council goal fiscal year 23-24 under livability, workability, deliverable 3.5A, develop annual report on housing. So we had brought the 2022 report to you and asked for feedback. Got a lot of good feedback. Feedback was add a definition section, add a section about barriers to housing production, and then also add our vacant land inventory map. So we made all those changes, repackaged the housing report, sent that out. And of course, all these changes were brought into the 2023 report as well, which we just got the data for. So jumping right into the actual 2023 report, really basic land use summary, not a whole lot of activity in terms of land use applications. We did one partition just here on the left, it's called the Pine Street partition, taking one kind of oversized lot, breaking it into 2. I think this property is now for sale right now, so you might see a house going up there on Sunset and Pine eventually. And then the other big one, which did come to city council, was a zone change. So there's a partition of this back lot, 3.3 acres behind the Ross and USPS. And then a zone change from retail commercial to high density residential. So I'm sure you guys recall that. So that was the housing summary of the housing related land use actions. Not a whole lot, no subdivisions. No multifamily projects approved. We did have some construction, but in terms of land use, it was pretty minimal. Really similar story in terms of the type of housing that we're getting as well. So similar to 2022, we had 87% of the units that were permitted were single family detached. The total units permitted were 80 total. So that's building permits issued. 10% multifamily and 3% ADU. 10% multifamily would have been the, what we're calling the Sherwood Boulevard apartments. There's a tree, vacant lot and a tree there. I think there used to be a shed on that property as well. So it's that property that got permitted, which I believe will go to construction this year.
It's only 2 ADUs then.
Yes, and I think both of those are Brookman addition interior to the home in Holt Homes. In terms of residential units constructed, we were at 53 total and 98% were single family. And so that'd probably just be 1 would be my guess, would be my math for actual ADUs constructed. In terms of the 5-year history, we're looking at this last time as well. The only new data is for 2023, but in terms of residential units permitted, pretty similar to 2022. So again, we had a lot of permits issued in 2019. This was the Middlebrook subdivision that dropped off with COVID and higher interest rates, but things are picking back up again. So pretty consistent between the 2 years. In terms of the units constructed, we did 53 this year. Drop off from 72 in 2022, but still higher than we were doing in 2019, 2020. So things are picking up a little bit. I expect 2024 probably to be in this range as well, is what we're seeing. We did get some new developers that had done not the large subdivisions that Middlebrook did, but medium-sized subdivisions, and they want to get their houses going as well. And so we kind of have 3 or 4 now different developers in the Brookman area that are building homes. So I expect this probably be around the same number for
So
2024.
question on that, when did the interest rates go? That was last June timeframe, or was it the year before?
I think it's been 2 years now.
It's been 2 years.
It was probably 2022 that they went up.
Okay. I was just trying to understand how to interpret that, like, do we have a half year you know, like come in at the beginning of the year and just trying to understand how to interpret it.
Yeah, I think a little difficult to tell with this. I think probably get through a few more years, it'll be a lot more clear. But I think we're still seeing home production. The builders are still building, right? And I think the question is how much can they sell based on those interest rates and but I think there's enough, you know, the housing market is still strong enough that even with the high interest rates, they're mostly moving forward. It's not total.
They're buying down upfront rates because the margin in construction is so high right now that they can afford to buy down the rates on the early years. Why you're selling new houses and you're not selling used.
Thank you. We did add the section barriers to housing production, just really briefly, in terms of, you know, from the city's perspective, infrastructure timing and cost is the biggest thing. And so, you know, us as a jurisdiction, how do we get more housing into Sherwood? The main barrier without a doubt is infrastructure. And, you know, can the developer actually pay for all the infrastructure, especially if it's looking like arterial roads, large intersections, things like that are needed. And also the timing of it, you know, we get the SDCs at occupancy after the home is basically constructed at times. So, or actually we get it at time of building permit for really large projects, it would be at occupancy. So it really doesn't, we get the money after we approve the land use and issue the building permit, which is an issue. And so this is where we talk about MISTIP bond cost share. You know, we're always looking for ways to bring the money in before the development actually occurs and then repay for the infrastructure. So infrastructure timing and cost is an issue. I think everyone's familiar with the high land costs in the Portland Metro, high construction costs for material, labor, limited skilled labor is an issue. And then we just have more and more difficult land to develop. You know, all the really nice, flat, unencumbered land is mostly gone in this region. And so it's really the remaining parcels are either, you know, outside the city, require annexation, you know, more regulatory hurdles, but then they also might have wetlands, steep slopes, things like that, the infill lots that no one has wanted to touch for a long time. The developer now has to figure out how to develop those properties if they're actually going to build something. So that's the constraints. And then in terms of next steps for all of this, we do send this information, not all of it, but most of the information to DLCD each year. We'll publish these on the city's website. We can use this as a resource for local policy making, and advocacy at the state and regional level. So if you guys are seeing stuff out of this report, you know, can inform how we approach Sherwood West Development Code, for example, or grants, funding, whatever. If you guys are interested in, you know, that type of thing, we have a clearer picture of what type of housing we're actually getting in the city. And then also, of course, when we're advocating at the state level, we have a clear picture of what, for the most part, the market is dictating in Sherwood right now, which is single family homes. And then, of course, we'll just create this report annually and bring it back to you at the beginning of the year. That's about it. Any questions?
Any questions? Thank you very much. All right, and so we have two more items. We want to donation lead policy. Lydia, so we have some resources there. I'm just assuming you didn't want to introduce yourself. No.
I think we have these donations first.
You just. Sometimes, yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you did all that. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Mayor, Council President, Councillors. It's nice to be here. I'm here to talk to you this evening about our proposed and draft leave donation policy. I've prepared a brief presentation for you. So just as a bit of background, the city has previously trialed a leave donation program back in September 2018, and the program was open for a year. It was a temporary policy and it applied to all represented and non-represented probationary and regular status city employees who were eligible to earn PTO and sick. I point that out because in the proposed new policy, the criteria for eligibility is actually a little tighter than was previously there. So I just wanted to really give you some highlights of the policy, and it is a voluntary policy. People are not expected to ask for it, nor do people have to donate. The eligibility is stricter than the temporary policy from 2018. We're trying to mirror as closely as we possibly can FMLA, OFLA, and to some extent paid leave Oregon eligibilities. Oh, I'm so sorry. So for that end, you'll see that we're looking at 6 months service eligibility for a medical emergency, and then it's shorter, 30 days eligibility for the death of a spouse, child, or parent. The donated leave, yes.
Is that for the person making the donation or the person
The person
receiving?
receiving.
Receiving donation.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the reason we've made that shorter is that currently in our policies, new employees can't use their sick for the first 90 days and they can't use their PTO for the first 6 months. So in an extreme scenario like that, we want to be able to allow those people to have a form of leave and request it. So the donated leave is going to come from PTO banks only. That's the same as the previous policy. And they must have exhausted all other paid leave alternatives before using donated leave. Now, there's some detail behind that around insurance policies that they may have and also paid leave Oregon eligibility. So we want to make sure that this really is a kind of last and final call to try and assist our employees. The leave donated is on an hour-for-hour basis and has no regard to dollar value. The reason that's significant too is that everybody's dollar hour within this organization is worth a different amount because of our pay schedules. But in this respect, we're simply looking at PTO as blocks of time with no monetary value assigned to them. So if you were a director and you were donating to someone in one of the lower pay scales, we're not going to pay regard to the value of that. We're not going to apply a multiplier.
Yeah, but math would just be too much fun.
Yeah. Oh,
And-
yes.
And is that actually the case where you don't donate it to a pool, you donate it to an individual?
So due to some pretty tight IRS regulations, it's donated to a pool,
Okay.
not to an individual, but
Right.
the pool can then be allocated out to an individual.
Okay.
So it's not a gift to an individual, it's
Right.
a
Gift
gift
to
that's
the
coming
pool.
into a
Perfect.
pool.
Okay.
And then you lead me beautifully onto the next
Okay.
part, which is that we'll be creating a leave donation bank, and those requests are going to be administered by the HR department. But before it even gets here, the HR department will have reviewed the request, the department director will have agreed the request, and the city manager would agree the request.
I mean, I would assume like an employee right now is probably not gonna say, oh, I'll put 40 of my hours in some bank. They're gonna know there's
Correct.
somebody who is in need, so then you put them in the bank and they know.
Correct. Yeah,
They'll
it's
most likely be going to.
Yeah, it's really a procedure to ensure that we're not putting anybody in a difficult position in terms of being the recipient of a taxable benefit. This is not considered consideration, it's purely considered time. So the question that we have for you really is, are you comfortable with us moving forward with this as a policy? It is, to all intents and purposes, a continuation of the temporary policy, just with some tighter criteria around its application.
Any questions, Council? Dan?
Are there any restrictions to when or who can donate their time?
Yes, there are. So a person has to have a minimum leave bank to be able to do that. It's only coming out of PTO banks, and it can only come when we have a request in place. So nobody would be able to take themselves, for example, into a negative bank. And the requests and the donation has to be at a minimum of an hour. So we're not going to get into, I'm donating 25 minutes. But yeah, in the guts of
Active need,
have that.
or is that an active need for it? Or
Yes. So in this case, we're trying to stay really closely aligned to the definitions that are provided in other acts, like the Family Medical Leave Act, so hence medical emergency or the death of a loved one, immediate family.
Is it pretty common to have this 30-day waiting period? And so, I mean, because frankly, if a spouse died a week into your employment, it seems like we'd want to cover that emergency as well, right? And so, is there a reason we're not?
No,
really-
To
okay.
answer your question,
we gotta
really,
think
to answer
about
your
it more.
question, really frankly, no, there is no reasoning behind that
Okay.
30-day. I don't think, I can't speak on behalf of
Well, the
the
lawyer had a
group, but
finger up here.
Maybe not legal dad, but I think one of the things that we try to work through with the policy is at the end of the day, Craig or the city manager would have the discretion to modify this to make, we want to take care of our people. That's the goal. So Craig
Okay.
would be able to make that decision.
Yeah, if this was like worded as a guideline, but you guys could override it as, for weird situations. I don't want to be stuck where we're like, well, we got hours to donate, but we can't do it unless,
yeah, and I think there's a couple of routes of achieving that. I think it's
Okay.
absolutely wise for us to have in the policy that it can be modified at the discretion of the city manager. I think based on feedback around the table, it would not be difficult for us to remove that 30-day in the event of a death. My preference and my advice is that if we have discretion, that's great, but we should be applying it as little as possible
Yeah, that's.
so that we have equity and we're not at risk.
Yeah.
We're trying to minimize risk here of someone
Yeah.
saying it was given to me and not to another. But based on the feedback of council,
Yeah.
we're very happy to remove that 30-day
I think as long as Craig has the ability to, or city manager has the ability to modify it in emergency or I think what you're talking about, there might be a unique circumstance we had
Yeah.
thought through.
Right, well, that's why we see, she said the reason, initially was to account for people
Who
that
can't
haven't been
use
here,
that, yeah.
that have a terrible thing happen. And I don't want it to be, okay, our hands are tied and so,
Yeah.
again, I think I'm okay with that as well, if he's got a.
Yeah.
Especially if there's employees that want to help out.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yeah.
We don't need to tie hands unnecessarily.
Yeah, okay, and so, we will make sure that it has that verbiage and.
I have two questions.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned it, but I'm not seeing it, or maybe I misunderstood. I see where they can't donate more than 40 hours of leave for
Yes.
12 months. But I don't see anywhere that it says they must retain at least an amount in their PTO. In other words, somebody donate all theirs and have no PTO to be able to recoup themselves throughout the year. Was there not gonna be a minimum that they needed to retain?
So I had thought we had that in, but actually I think we took that back out on the basis that that's of an employee's choosing, right? If they want to take their PTO down to minimums, that's on them. They're gonna be accruing again because we do have PTO accruals. So I think, and forgive me, I misspoke. So I think we had that in a previous version that we were looking at and then removed it in terms of, it's really on the donor. The key to this is the donor understanding that if they donate leave,
They don't
it's not
get it
coming back. And I think we've made that pretty clear, but thank you for asking
And
that.
I'm assuming there's gonna be a form that they sign,
There is, yeah.
hopefully an electronic.
My second question was,
We can do that.
under the person who needs the donation,
Yes.
it says they can have no more than 40 hours of unused PTO.
Yes, so the reason we put that in there is because we understand there's gonna be a lag between somebody realizing there's a situation that they need it and them having PTO. So as is in here, the expectation is that theirs will go to zero. They have to have exhausted all paid leaves prior to using it. But we also wanted to build into there a buffer, so if somebody's in need of this, they're not waiting till they're zero and then they have nothing while we go through a process.
So like
of vetting.
overlap, but people
Exactly
donating
that.
while they're using their last 40.
Exactly that
Okay.
purpose.
So what is the definition of a medical emergency?
So we're using the same definitions as we have in FMLA. So a serious health condition of yourself.
Member.
Yeah,
Yeah, because when I think emergency, I think of something that's happenstance, whereas
Yeah.
I thought this was more for like long-term illness or something cancer, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and originally we had that in there and when because we took this to CIS for them to take a look at and give us, their kind of risk assessment of the policy. And it was their recommendation that we mirror the language.
I agree.
Thank you.
Great. Any other
A
questions?
couple other questions.
Yeah.
The people who donate or choose not to donate, is that anonymous?
Yes.
It will be on them to disclose to the donor if they want to disclose that they've donated, and equally, if somebody needs to receive leave and they wish to remain anonymous, they can 100% remain anonymous.
So the people who are choosing not to,
Yes.
I don't want them to be
Yeah,
negatively.
absolutely. And that's why we're administering it through the HR department. And I mean, what I will say is we are aware of a situation where if this were a policy that council approved, there will be an employee, we believe, have a need for this reasonably quickly. But though these types of scenarios really are very few and far between. But what we want is to have something in place that we can utilize if we need to.
And if an employee who needs it and gives permission for HR to share with
Yes.
the organization, you
Yeah.
can.
We can.
Saying, hey, we have this, blah, blah, whatever they want shared.
But the default position will be that it's anonymous.
And I guess I don't know the policy today, to Renee's question. If in the second week I have a doctor's appointment that's, an hour. But that's not really a medical, it's, a checkup or something. Can I just get that approved through my manager, or do I have to apply for something like this to just go to a standard medical appointment?
So this wouldn't be used for that type of
Okay.
purpose. So typically, if you're within the first 90 days in the organization, and I think this is a good conversation for another time
Okay.
for us to look at. But as it stands at the moment, within those first 90 days, if you needed to attend a medical appointment, you would do that unpaid.
Okay,
So this is really for these kind of dire straits
Great.
type situations.
yeah, let's have that other conversation, because you also don't. I want to encourage people to come work here. I don't want
Yeah.
people to go, hey, I have a dentist appointment in 3 weeks. Ooh, I gotta.
Yes.
PTO for that, what, there's gotta be.
Well, and they
something,
can't
yeah.
use their PTO.
No, I know, that's what I mean,
No,
and so it just seems a little archaic.
There's a lot,
That's right.
there's flex hours, there's a lot of different ways to
Okay.
go with that.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's something that going forward, you will likely see come forward to council for further discussion
Great,
in terms of those policies.
Any other questions?
Any more questions on the leave donation policy?
Everyone okay with the staff bringing this forward as a resolution?
Thank you very much, council.
Did this, 15 years ago, but it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the one-off, there was a one-off one here, probably, I don't know.
2018,
something like
2018,
that.
2019.
Say 6 or 7, 8 years ago, yeah. there's one.
Are we okay not having a sunset on this one? Can we just have that be the policy until we change it?
I'd like this to
Yeah.
be the policy
Yeah.
that eventually
Okay.
goes into the new employees handbook and we can move forward.
Always
Yeah.
write a new policy.
Yeah, that's what I mean, is I don't want to have to do it. just-
Yeah, no, so
Yeah.
this, yeah, so the way that
Great.
this proposed policy is written is that this becomes an appendix to our employee handbook, whichever iteration of that handbook
Great.
moves forward.
Awesome.
Okay,
Alrighty.
thank you.
Thank you very much, and we're gonna move on to our last work session.
Okay.
It's the work back program.
We rely on Brad to help me out here on the technology again.
Lydia is going to lead us again.
Thank you, Brad.
Take her away.
Okay, so this is again, just a very brief presentation on the PERS workback proposed policy extension. So again, but in terms of what I'm presenting today is some background on the policy that we've had before and what the general ask or proposal is. So for those who are unaware of of what we're asking, this policy was originally put in place and was extended to the police department. And it was intended to help the city address potential increases in retirements, fill skill gaps, and also assist with an unfunded liability in the PERS program itself, or system, I should say here. So that program has now been extended and has been extended to sunset in 2035. And just as a bit of context for those who may not understand what this means, this actual policy is around allowing somebody who has served their time in the PERS retirement program to retire, receive their retirement benefits, and then return to work for an employer who is also part of that same pension program. And one of the things I just want to sort of highlight in this is that a PERS retiree can work for any private employer without restriction, which is why it's important, I believe, to just address and understand what this program is, so that we're not spending time building skills and experience within the public sector and then losing it to the private sector longer term.
And I think it's important to point out too, because if we have an employee retire and then come back as a full-time employee, we're not paying the PERS contributions either.
Absolutely.
So we're actually, not only is it a benefit for the employee, it's a benefit for the city as well.
Yes, thank you.
We're not
Marissa.
paying either side of PERS, I mean, the employee, the 6% or the 28.
So the 28 still is paid, but it's paid, it doesn't, the employee themselves does not benefit from that percentage. That percentage is going into assisting with that underfunded liability.
Of the city.
So we say the 6%.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
But in general, I don't, it's nice, but if that was the reason for doing this, I would never support this.
Yes,
No, it is.
that's a big benefit.
yeah,
Just
it's
the
one,
benefit.
it's one of
And
them.
here we go, and I chat with multiple people, but it should be an extreme situation where we need to shore up what we're doing.
Yeah, I think there's two, and I have a screen, slide kind of outlining some of the benefits to it, because I think there's a recruitment element to it and there's a retention element to it. What I wanted to do is just give you a little bit of context around our employee demographics first. So, and excuse the format, we kind of lifted these directly out of the HRIS. So just for information purposes, at the end of 2024, 18 employees will have 20 years or more service within the city, which is wonderful, but at the same time presents a level of risk in terms of the amount of skills and experience that can walk out of the door. And 19% of our current workforce is over 55. So you can see exactly in line. I know you had AARP last week or at the last council meeting coming and talking about the population at wide. We're mirroring those statistics. So the caveat to this data that I'm about to give you is that there's limited information we can get on the report from PERS. So these eligibilities are based on an individual's first contribution to PERS. It may be that there is a little bit of leeway there if they have had a break in their PERS service, but this is about as close a data as we could get to just understand what our current position is. So based on either age eligibility or an individual's first contribution to PERS and then being fully vested, 6 employees are currently eligible to retire across the organization. Later in 2024, we have a further 3 that will become eligible. And we have 6 employees that are eligible between January 25 and December 26. And then in terms of early retirement, we have 11 employees that qualify under one or more of those reasons to potentially take early retirement. So, why do we think that we should be looking at extending and expanding work back? I want to touch on where we've had successes and where we've had some missed opportunities. So at the moment, this has been police department only and not citywide. And our proposed policy is to mirror what we have done, but expand it citywide. We've seen a really successful recruitment of an external candidate into a captain role. And we've also been able to use it for some successful career cycle planning with the exit of 2 of our retiring sergeants who we were able to retain temporarily using the work back program. And that allowed us to then work through promotions of 2 internal candidates up into sergeant roles. So it's worked really well in terms of plugging that skill gap that we have. But also the ability to offer work back has meant that we've been able to recruit and attract a very highly qualified, very highly skilled individual from another jurisdiction. Missed opportunities. So I'm sure the city manager can relate to this one in Public Works. An example that we would give here is a lead maintenance worker water. The level of certifications that these people are required to have is very high. We've been openly recruiting this position for 18 months, and upon retirement, the role holder left and went to work for ultimately another public sector employer. So we've had that person, they've retired with us. We've now got a skills gap that we haven't been able to fill, and they've gone to another public sector employer that offers potentially work back or a different program. So just picking up on what you had asked previously around the benefit, there's no employee PERS contribution pickup, which is that 6%. The other element of this is that we can't be, when are you going to retire, when are you going to retire? What this does is open up gateways to have proactive discussions regarding plans and transitions to retirement. Without us making assumptions about people and risking that very short notice period. So it allows us better time for career cycle planning and to have that time to mentor and transfer that institutional knowledge. And also, I think particularly important for us is those community relationships. It gives us time for us to do those transitions externally too, because a lot of our folks have built up long-standing relationships external to the organization as well as internal. The reality of this, if we don't retain and use the skills and knowledge or be able to recruit them, somebody else will. And that is just the landscape that we're faced with now in terms of particularly our recruitment. And we're seeing people leave and go elsewhere. So our recommendation is basically an expansion of the existing work back program that we have. There will continue to be no automatic right to work back. Again, this is a discretionary policy. This is not a policy where anybody who wants to retire will automatically be eligible for work back. This is a needs-based policy. The work back policy we're proposing be extended by 5 years. And as we've talked about, the policy is extended citywide. With that said, I would like to hand that over. I'll be careful with time, but.
And the needs determined by the city manager.
Correct, department director and city manager. Yeah.
In the current work back language, not here, but in general is 2035, correct?
Correct. Yeah, so the program itself is 2035, but we're requesting a 5-year extension at this time and to come back and have that reviewed again at the end of December or as near as of 2029. To reevaluate, we may be dealing with a different recruiting landscape, a different retention landscape. So we want to make sure that we're still building in flexibility around that policy. But the key is this truly is a discretionary policy. And again, I would highlight that I believe it has a very strong purpose in recruitment, as well as the retention of skills exiting.
Thank you, Lydia. Any questions, Dave?
So somebody who is retiring and then we would ask them to work again, why would they retire then? Don't they lose benefits by retiring and then becoming a work back employee?
It allows them to draw their full pension and receive that income and then come back to work and receive their salary or wages.
And they would be hired back at their same salary, or is there a base for their band that they're hired back in?
I think that's going to depend on the scenario and the role. So to all intents and purposes, once they've left, they become a new hire
Right.
to us, but I think that's going to very much depend on the individual circumstances of the exiting
And
person.
if I understood you right, one of the scenarios we're seeing a lot too is it's not a former employee of ours, it's someone who's retired out of another
Yes.
organization.
Gotcha.
And we're getting to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and so a good example, you know, obviously I don't want to discuss names, but a very good example of where we've seen that happen successfully in the police department is that one of our officers who came to us as a lateral officer had retired from another police organization and is a recipient of those benefits, not PERS, but in receipt of their retirement benefits, came to us as a lateral officer. We've been able to utilize those skills. That person was promoted into a sergeant role. So we're seeing the benefit of having had that program. That very, very capable and experienced sergeant could be working in another jurisdiction if we did not have the policy enabling us to do that.
And is there flexibility in the work back where, you know, somebody retires and we're trying to get their replacement or recruit or whatever?
Yeah.
That we can say, hey, we only need you for half time while you're training or
Yes.
something like that as well. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And yeah, and that's the purpose of making this an entirely discretionary policy.
Yeah.
To allow us to negotiate terms that work for the city. And it's not an automatic right for people for
Yeah.
exactly that purpose. Thank you, councillor Giles.
Great.
So question,
Yeah.
now what you said just confused me.
Okay.
If somebody is retired elsewhere from another organization that
Yes.
wasn't a PERS organization.
Yes.
Is that still considered a work back?
It's not.
Okay.
But the only difference is that they were with another organization. The principle
Okay,
is
so-
the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. But that didn't make sense to me, but
Yes.
For key positions, the market is so strong
Ah.
right now for employees. I mean, employees can pick and choose, so this gives us a little competitive edge.
well, I like that you just highlighted that it's not an automatic right. And it's supposed to be for specific needs, so that we don't
Yes.
have 18 people who are saying, "Oh, I'm just gonna retire because then I'll do 2 years work, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it's a position we, how do we know we can't fill it? So do you do the work back and then you start trying to fill it, the
So it-
career cycle planning type thing starts taking place?
Yeah, I think it can be an either or situation. You know, I think in some roles, like that lead maintenance worker for water, it's pretty predictable that that's going to be a very difficult role to fill because of the level of the certifications. And then even if we bring in a new hire at a lower level with the lower level of certification, there's a period of time then for them to be able to get their next level, and that just allows us that kind of handover. So I think it's twofold.
And we're recruiting for a position and we've approved this for that position, we've expanded our pool of candidates. Because we're not
Absolutely.
automatically disqualifying people because they retired at another city.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for us, up to this point, it's been good fortune, for example, that Portland Police Department have an entirely different pension program.
And there also doesn't, we wouldn't have to make the decision at retirement, right? We could try to fill it for, you know, this one's 18 months has been open. Theoretically, if he was retired and after 6 months, we can't find somebody, we could say, hey, would you be interested in doing this work back program? And so there could be one of those things where we look for somebody and then say, wow, it's just a desert.
We looked for them prior to the person retiring.
No, even if they have retired, right, and the person's on a beach
Oh,
somewhere.
like we call them.
And then we
like
say,
they
hey,
used to
by
be.
the way, are you bored of retirement? Because we would love to have
No,
you back.
they touched the sand already, they're not bored.
Yeah, we can apply it as an after the
After the
event.
event, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
okay. And so there's really, in terms of knowing how much this is gonna cost the city, right now, it's almost negligible because we're paying that person's salary now. And if we're not hiring them or anything, you know, yes, we'd be saving money, but somebody's doing extra work or burning through, and so it's kind of a wash on that.
Well,
Right.
But if you set aside like which grade and step.
Yeah.
For a second, we're saving a little bit of money.
A little, the 6%,
6%.
yeah, okay, so, okay, all right. I think I'm fine with that.
A prime example for the maintenance worker, the lead maintenance worker. would have given us time for somebody in the organization to get their years of service to be able to take the test, right? So that's where you would use that. And they pass their test, then you would have been able to promote within.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's everybody in that side right now. They're not qualified to even set up the testing at the table to be able to test.
yeah. And the other side to that is if we had an applicant who had retired through the PERS program, we would be able to bring them in and do the same
Yeah.
thing.
Okay.
Are there any more questions I can assist anybody with?
Yeah.
For the situation like that, the person gets promoted from within, the person who's working the work back, is it in their contract that we no longer need them at that point, or how is that structured?
So the purpose of the work back policy is that these are at will contracts.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
It's a good indication.
Good question.
So I think what we would like to do is, similar to the other policies, just bring this forward for a consent agenda.
Consensus to bring it forward? All right,
So I'd like to bring this and the donation one to the next one.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, council.
That was awesome. Appreciate it.
And
All right.
I don't know how much you did.
That was it for our work session, so we are adjourned. We'll pick that up in the regular meeting at 7 o'clock. 2 minutes.